No one expected a revolution that morning. Least of all the girl in the back row who barely spoke, who walked through Harvard Yard like a whisper. The sky outside was a steady gray, one of those New England mornings that seemed too quiet, as if something were waiting to happen. Inside the cold walls of Mathematics Lecture Hall C, students shifted in their chairs, sipping overpriced coffee, tapping away on laptops. Most of them weren't paying attention, at least not until Dr. Richard Ellison walked in without a word and began writing. It started as a single symbol. Then another. Then an avalanche. He didn't say, "Good morning." He didn't ask for questions. He just wrote, line after line of dense mathematical expressions, strange operators, elegant chaos. The sound of chalk against the board was rhythmic, almost violent. By the time he stepped back, the whiteboard looked like a battlefield. Equations stacked upon equations, symbols twisting into each other like vines, the remnants of some ancient code. A murmur rippled through the room. Some students squinted at the board. Others looked at each other, uncertain whether this was a joke, a test, or the start of something historic. Dr. Ellison turned to face them, chalk dust still clinging to his fingers. "This," he said, gesturing toward the sprawling mess of logic and abstraction behind him, "has not been solved in 78 years. The equation was originally proposed by a Hungarian theorist who died before completing his proof. Since then, it's floated through academic circles like a ghost. MIT couldn't crack it. Oxford came close, at least, that's what they claimed. I've worked on it for the past 12 years. And I'm not ashamed to say it's beaten me." A few students laughed nervously. Dr. Ellison didn't. "I'm putting it here," he continued, "because I believe someone in this room might see what the rest of us couldn't. You won't get credit for it. No grade bump. No prize money. Just the right to say you solved what Harvard couldn't." The silence was sharp. In the back corner, almost hidden behind a tall concrete pillar, Amara Williams didn't move. She'd been sitting in the same spot every lecture since the semester began, quiet, hoodie pulled over her braids, notebook open on her lap. No laptop. No phone. Just pen and paper. Some thought she was strange. Others didn't even notice her. But in that moment, her eyes locked on the board like she'd seen it before, not the exact equation, but something inside it, buried in the structure. A rhythm. A broken melody she could almost hear. The room erupted in chatter. "Yo, he's joking, right? Is that tensor calculus or just his grocery list?" "Nah, it's real. I saw this in an old journal once, it's a variation on the Conway conjecture. They say it drove one guy in Berkeley halfway insane." Amara didn't say a word. She was already flipping back a few pages in her notebook, heart quietly thudding. She recognized fragments of the structure, or maybe she imagined she did. But something about it felt familiar. Dangerous, but familiar. Dr. Ellison scanned the class slowly, his gaze cold and analytical, as if trying to spot the one student who might dare take a swing. His eyes swept past Amara, barely hesitating. She didn't fit the mold, at least, not the one he was used to. She wasn't loud. She wasn't entitled. She didn't carry herself like someone who expected to win. The bell rang. Chairs screeched. Students filed out, buzzing like a kicked-up beehive. But Amara stayed behind. Just a moment longer. Just long enough to copy the equation into her notebook, line by line, with the same quiet focus she'd had since the day she stepped onto this campus. Outside, the leaves were beginning to turn. Later that night, in her dorm room, she sat cross-legged on her bed, a cheap desk lamp casting long shadows over the pages in front of her. Her roommate was out. The building was quiet. She stared at the equation again, her pencil hovering just above the page. Her phone buzzed, another text from her mom back in Atlanta. She'd answer later. Right now, all she could hear was the hum of the problem, the way it seemed to pulse like a living thing. She remembered the first time she saw beauty in numbers. She was 8. Her mother had just gotten off a double shift, her hands raw from scrubbing, her voice hoarse. Amara had solved a puzzle on the back of a cereal box, something simple, just patterns and logic, but she'd stared at it for hours afterward, mesmerized by how the numbers fit together like pieces of music. Her mom had smiled through her exhaustion. "That brain of yours, baby girl," she'd said. "That's your way out." At 12, she was doing algebra most kids didn't touch until college. At 14, she won a state-level competition but never told anyone at school. She didn't like the way people looked at her when she won, surprised, skeptical. Like the numbers must have cheated in her favor. Now here she was, at Harvard, sitting under a flickering dorm light with a problem that had broken world-class minds. And still, she couldn't look away. The first line, she noticed, wasn't about the numbers themselves. It was about symmetry. A trick. A misdirection. Something hidden in the way variables repeated, not exact repetitions, but echoes. Like fractals. Like jazz. She began scribbling. Lines, arcs, a chain of symbols only she could understand. 3 hours passed. She didn't notice the time, the hunger, the cramp in her fingers. All that mattered was the pulse of the math, the tug of something ancient and elegant pulling her deeper. By 2 a.m., her desk was covered in notes. Her fingers were smudged with graphite. Her hair was tied up messily, her eyes bloodshot but burning. She stared at a single line she'd just written. It wasn't the solution. Not yet. But it was something no one else had seen. She was sure of it. She leaned back, breathing in sharply, and whispered to herself, "You're not impossible. You're just waiting for someone who listens." The equation didn't answer. But something in her chest stirred, something like certainty. She wasn't trying to be a prodigy. She wasn't trying to prove anyone wrong. She was just following the numbers. And for the first time since she arrived on campus, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she belonged here. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Before Harvard, before the spiraling equations and the heavy silence of Lamont Library at midnight, there was Atlanta. There was the scent of lemon furniture polish, the rattle of a broken ceiling fan, the clatter of pots from the downstairs kitchen. There was a single mother named Gloria Williams and her only daughter, Amara, sitting cross-legged on a worn linoleum floor with a stack of old math workbooks rescued from a yard sale. Amara had learned to divide before she learned to ride a bike. Numbers made more sense than people did. They didn't lie. They didn't leave. They didn't raise their voices or slam doors when the world pushed too hard. Her mother used to say, "That brain of yours is a gift, baby girl. Don't you ever let anyone shrink it to make them feel bigger." Gloria worked 2 jobs, day shifts at the nursing home, night shifts cleaning office buildings downtown. Sometimes Amara didn't see her for 2 full days, just found sticky notes on the fridge with instructions and little hearts drawn in the corners. They lived in a small duplex where the heat barely worked in winter and the AC screamed in summer. But it was theirs. Her mother had fought for every inch of it. And through it all, Amara studied. She didn't talk much. Never had. Her 4th grade teacher once called her strangely quiet during a parent-teacher meeting, but her mother just laughed and said, "That's because she's always listening." And trust me, she remembers everything. Amara had never felt the need to raise her voice. The louder kids always got the attention, but it never lasted. She preferred the back of the room, near the window. It gave her a clear view of the sky, geometry in motion. That's how she started thinking of clouds, fractals, turbulent flow, patterns hidden in chaos. By middle school, teachers had stopped giving her regular assignments. Instead, They printed college-level problem sets from online databases and challenged her to finish them by the end of the week. She usually did by Tuesday. Still, the recognition came slowly. There were whispers, she must be cheating. Maybe her mom's doing it for her. She probably memorized the answers. Never mind that Gloria hadn't taken a math class in 20 years. Never mind that Amara solved problems in real time, explaining them aloud with quiet precision. At 14, she was invited to a summer math camp for gifted youth in North Carolina. It was her first time leaving Atlanta. Her first time on a plane. Her first time realizing what it meant to be the only black girl in a room full of prodigies. They welcomed her at first, with curiosity, with caution. Then came the questions: where are you really from? Did your school have real calculus classes? You talk so proper, were you homeschooled? She learned to smile politely. To shrink herself just enough to pass unnoticed. She didn't argue when they stole her ideas during team problem-solving sessions. Didn't speak up when her name was left off the finalist list despite earning the highest score. She just went home and worked harder. By the time she applied to Harvard, her resume was stacked with awards. National Math Olympiad semi-finalist. Perfect SAT, local newspaper feature under the headline, Atlanta Teen Tackles College-Level Math. She submitted a supplemental essay that began with the line, "Math never cared what I looked like. It only cared that I showed up." When the acceptance letter came, Gloria cried quietly in the kitchen while Amara sat on the porch, stunned by the silence that followed. They celebrated with 2 slices of lemon cake and a walk through their neighborhood. Her mom linked arms with her and said, "Don't let them change you up there. You hear me? Be quiet if you need to, but don't ever be small." Now, sitting alone in the Harvard dining hall, Amara remembered that night. The words, the smell of warm pavement after rain, the sharp pride in her mother's voice. She took a sip of her tea and pulled out her notebook. Around her, students talked and laughed. Some of them recognized each other from prep schools in Connecticut or internships with professors she'd only read about in journals. Their conversations were sprinkled with phrases like, legacy, and, consulting track, and, my dad knows someone at the Federal. Amara didn't know anyone. She hadn't come here with connections. Just a scholarship, a battered TI-89, and a determination to listen harder than anyone else. Dar. Ellison hadn't spoken to her directly since the day he wrote the unsolvable equation on the board. But something about the way he watched his students made her feel like he was always evaluating, measuring. He hadn't noticed her yet, not really. Not in the way that mattered. She wasn't sure she wanted him to. Back in her dorm room, she pulled open the drawer beneath her bed and took out an old photo. It was from 8th grade, her and her mother standing in front of the local public library, both holding a trophy from the Regional Math League. Amara had braces and braids back then. Her mother was wearing her nursing scrubs and a grin that lit up the entire frame. That night, they'd eaten fried chicken from a paper bag on the steps of the library and talked about the stars. "You're gonna change the world someday," her mom had whispered. "Even if they try to ignore you, even if they act like you're invisible, you keep going. You're a storm, Amara. A quiet one. The kind they don't see coming." Harvard didn't see her coming, either. But she was here now. And she wasn't going anywhere. She turned back to her notebook, flipped past the pages of class notes and sketches until she reached the full transcription of Ellison's equation. She traced the first line with her finger, then began to write beneath it. A possible simplification. A shift in variable orientation. A reduction pattern in disguise. She didn't know where it would lead yet, but it was talking to her. Quietly. Patiently. Like it had been waiting all these years for her to show up and finally listen. She smiled, faint but fierce, and kept writing. On the 3rd Monday of the semester, something shifted. It wasn't the weather. Boston was still sitting in that uneasy space between summer's retreat and fall's arrival. It wasn't the rhythm of classes or the chatter in the dining halls. It was something quieter, subtler. The way people looked at Amara when she entered the room. Or, more accurately, the way they didn't. She walked into math lecture hall a few minutes early, as always. Hoodie up, headphones in, notebook under her arm. She sat in her usual spot, back row, far left, half hidden behind a tall, dusty plant. Invisible by design. But that morning, she noticed the whispering before she even sat down. A few heads turned in her direction. A guy in a Patagonia vest, sitting 2 rows ahead, glanced at her, then turned to his friend and murmured something. They laughed quietly. Amara's gut tightened. Dr. Ellison entered on cue, briefcase in hand, coat slung over his arm. He was always precise. Controlled. As if every movement was calculated like the proofs he scribbled across the board. Today, though, he didn't head straight for the equations. Instead, he folded his arms and surveyed the class. I've received, he said, a handful of partial attempts on the equation I gave you. Some were imaginative. Others, predictable. He let the silence stretch. And one, he added, was interesting. Now they were listening. Ellison turned to the board and, for the first time in 3 weeks, didn't write anything. Instead, he spoke. The submission didn't have a name attached. Just 10 pages of handwritten logic. Rough but not careless. Elegant, in places. Almost, musical. Amara froze. Her notes. She'd left them in the math department drop box after hours last Friday, and signed. She hadn't planned on sharing them, not really. But something inside her. A restlessness, maybe, or the weight of silence, had pushed her hand. She didn't expect him to notice. And she definitely didn't expect him to say anything. There's a shift in this approach, Ellison continued. A willingness to step outside accepted frameworks. To treat the problem not like a wall, but a living system. He paused, then looked around the room. Whoever you are, keep going. You're closer than most people have gotten in a decade. Amara ducked her head quickly as a ripple of speculation ran through the rows. Ellison has a favorite already? Bet it's Lucas. Nah, maybe it's Charlotte, she interned with Fermat Lab last summer. Amara kept her hands in her lap. Her notebook stayed closed. She didn't move a muscle. But inside, her chest was pulsing with something strange and sharp. Not pride. Not yet. More like fear of being seen. Later that day, while walking across campus, she passed by a group of students in the courtyard. One of them, a tall guy with cropped hair and an easy smile, caught her eye. Hey, he called out, you're in Ellison's class, right? Amara slowed, wary. You always sit in the back, he added, jogging a few steps to catch up. I'm Jordan. Math and physics track. She nodded politely. Amara. He studied her, clearly curious. You, working on the big problem? She hesitated. A little. He grinned. Me too. Though it's chewing me up. I've tried, 5 approaches already. None of them make sense past line 3. Amara gave a tight smile. Maybe that's the point. Jordan raised an eyebrow, amused. You're quiet, huh? She shrugged. I like that. Most people here love to hear themselves talk. He walked with her for a few more minutes, asking questions about where she was from, what classes she was taking, what she thought of Ellison. She answered simply, carefully. But beneath her calm, she was measuring him, too. People had started noticing her. And that meant something was about to change. In the dining hall that evening, things escalated. She was standing in line for soup when she heard it. She probably copied someone's work, a voice muttered behind her. No one's even seen her speak in class. And now suddenly she's ahead of the curve. Amara didn't turn around. She didn't need to. She recognized the voice, Charlotte Kingsley. Third-generation Harvard, prep school valedictorian, the kind of girl who carried herself like she'd already been promised the future. Amara reached for a spoon, keeping her hand steady. She's not even in the advanced seminar, Charlotte continued, laughing. But sure, let's pretend she cracked part of the hardest equation in the department. From the back row. With a spiral notebook. More laughter. Amara walked away. She didn't cry. She never did in public. But her appetite disappeared. She sat at a corner table, barely touching her food, her mind swirling with all the old, ugly whispers she thought she'd left behind in Atlanta. She doesn't belong here. She's a fluke. They made a mistake admitting her. And yet, Ellison had seen something in her work. Something real. Something different. Why did that threaten people so much? That night, she walked back to her dorm with her hood up, headphones in, but no music playing. Just silence. She needed to think. She needed to breathe. Upstairs, in her room, she pulled out her notebook and stared at the equation again. Was she really the only one who saw the pattern beneath the surface? Was she imagining it? She flipped to a fresh page and began writing. Not because she wanted to prove anything. Not to shut people up. But because the problem still whispered to her, and she wasn't done listening. Halfway through a new line of thought, her phone buzzed. A message from her mother. Just checking in, baby. You okay? Remember, quiet storms change the weather. Amara smiled for the first time all day. She turned her phone face down and leaned back over her work. Let them whisper. Let them doubt. She wasn't here to be liked. She was here to solve the damn thing. Amara woke up to the low hum of her alarm and the persistent, dull ache behind her eyes. It was the kind of exhaustion that came not from sleep deprivation but from mental strain, the kind that made everything feel like it was pulling in different directions at once. She hadn't felt rested in days, but she couldn't stop. Not now. Not when she was this close. She stretched, blinking against the early light filtering through her dorm window. For the past week, she had been living on caffeine and the quiet hum of late-night thoughts. The equation was still there, calling to her. Each night, she'd sit in front of her notebook, staring at it like it was a puzzle box just on the verge of unlocking. In the evenings, the rest of the dorm would go out, parties, bars, group study sessions, but Amara remained locked away in her small room, the pages of her notebook the only company she trusted. It was safer that way. If she kept her head down, if she kept working, the world would leave her alone. Except that it didn't. Her walk to the lecture hall was longer than usual. She didn't know why. Maybe it was because she was becoming more aware of the eyes on her, those lingering glances as she entered the room. Or maybe it was the conversation she overheard the night before in the hallway when the students from her group project said, "I heard the quiet girl in the back cracked Ellison's equation." It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. An unspoken challenge. Amara squeezed her notebook to her chest and kept walking. Inside the lecture hall, the tension in the air was palpable. Dr. Ellison was at the front, writing out equations on the board, but his focus kept drifting toward her. He'd been doing that more and more, analyzing her as if trying to determine if she was the answer to something, or part of the problem. The first time he did it, it was subtle. A quick glance after he dropped the equation on the board. Then a second one, when she remained silent after class, scribbling in her notebook. Today, though, it was different. His eyes followed her from the door to her seat. It didn't feel like recognition. It felt like expectation. As the lecture began, Amara sank into her chair, focusing on the chalk dust floating through the air, tracing the formulas Ellison was writing. But her mind wasn't entirely on the equations. She kept thinking about her discovery. For the last few days, she'd noticed a pattern that none of the other students had. It wasn't a simple mistake or a lucky guess, it was something deeper. A shift in the way the variables interacted. Something hidden, but undeniable. A string of thought that ran through all the complex systems and solutions, something that almost felt like a red thread connecting all the chaos. She'd stared at it for hours the night before, tracing the sequence with her pencil. Slowly, she began to see the way it unfolded. The variables were connected not by a series of calculations, but by something more fundamental, something fundamental to every number. But she couldn't quite finish it. Ellison's voice broke her concentration. "And now," he said, turning to face the class, "I'm going to give you something new today. I'd like you to consider how this equation scales. How it might evolve beyond its initial parameters." He paused, letting the words settle over them. The equation is a starting point. But to truly understand it, you need to think about it on a different level, more dynamic, more alive. The room went quiet. Most students were scribbling notes, trying to catch up. Amara's hand hovered above her notebook. Her mind was racing. Was this a test? Was he trying to push them to see the equation in a new way? Suddenly, everything clicked into place. The red thread. It wasn't just a pattern. It was a way of seeing the equation not as static, but as a part of a larger, evolving system. It was a living equation, something that could breathe and grow. And there, in that moment, Amara realized that she was the only one who could see it. No one else had connected the dots in this way. They were too busy trying to fit it into neat, tidy formulas that worked on paper but didn't hold up when the variables shifted. Her pulse quickened as she jotted down the new approach, her pen moving faster than her thoughts could catch. There was a quiet thrill building in her chest. She could feel it. The equation was alive. It was waiting for someone to hear it, to see the patterns it whispered through the noise. But before she could write the final piece, she felt eyes on her again. This time, it wasn't just Dr. Ellison. It was everyone. Her heart skipped a beat. She looked up to see a few students glancing in her direction. Jordan was among them. His eyebrows were raised, but his expression was guarded, unsure. He wasn't the only one. A few others were watching her too, their gazes piercing in the way that suggested they had already formed an opinion about her. She straightened in her seat, trying to ignore the growing weight of their stares. But she couldn't help it. The heat of their attention was suddenly overwhelming, like they could all sense something was happening that they couldn't quite understand. Amara stood, pulling her notebook close, and quickly left the classroom without another word. Outside, the air was colder than usual. The wind bit at her skin as she walked toward the library. She had to finish this. There was no time to waste. Not now, not when she had seen something that no one else had. Not when she was on the verge of cracking something that had been unsolved for decades. The problem with seeing things no one else could see, though, was that it made you a target. She had learned that the hard way growing up, being the girl who was too quiet, too different, too smart for her own good. The whispers behind her back had always been there, but they didn't matter when she was alone with her work. Now, though, the whispers were getting louder. And they weren't just whispers anymore. Amara stopped in front of Lamont Library and took a deep breath. She had to find a way to finish this, to finish the equation without getting lost in the noise. Without letting the assumptions of others cloud her focus. She didn't care what they thought. She didn't care if they doubted her. The equation wasn't about them. It was about her. And it had always been about her. She was ready. The air in the math and physics lab always felt a little colder than anywhere else on campus. Maybe it was the sterile lighting, or the polished surfaces of the desks, or maybe it was just the sense that every equation solved in this room had led to something bigger. Whatever it was, Amara had grown accustomed to it, though today, it felt different. Today, it felt like the lab was closing in on her, the walls lined with textbooks and chalkboards suddenly pressing down like a weight she couldn't shake. Amara walked in, the heavy doors clanging shut behind her. She didn't look around for familiar faces. Most of the grad students and PhDs were lost in their own projects anyway. She headed straight for the back corner, where her favorite station was set up, tucked in the shadow of an ancient chalkboard that looked like it had been used for a century. She pulled out her notebook, spread the papers she'd been working on, and took a deep breath. The calculations were building in her mind, stacking on top of each other like a tower. Each line of reasoning was more intricate, more connected than before. She had stumbled upon something, a pattern that would solve the equation, that would finally reveal its secret. She knew it in her gut. But she also knew that the moment she cracked this code, everything would change. Her pencil hovered over the page, and for a moment, the room seemed to go silent. There was a hum in her ears, the only sound her heartbeat thudding in time with the rush of her thoughts. She reached down to start writing, but then, unexpectedly, she heard a voice behind her. Amara. She froze. The voice was familiar, but not someone she expected to hear now. Dr. Ellison. She turned slowly, meeting his gaze. There was something different in the way he looked at her today, more intent, more calculating. He wasn't just the professor anymore. He was a man with a purpose. And that purpose was clearly connected to her. Dr. Ellison, she said, standing up quickly, a wave of sudden self-consciousness washing over her. She brushed a stray lock of hair behind her ear, suddenly aware of how disheveled she probably looked. I didn't expect to see you here. Ellison nodded, stepping closer to her station, his gaze flickering over the papers scattered across the desk. She immediately felt a shift in the air, like he was evaluating every line, every assumption, every conclusion she'd made. I've been reviewing the submissions from the students who've worked on the equation, he said quietly, leaning in slightly. I've noticed some things. A few, unexpected approaches. Yours, in particular. Amara's breath caught in her throat. Her work. He had seen her work. That was not what she had expected to hear. I know, she said, trying to sound casual but feeling the heat of the moment rising to her cheeks. I've been tinkering with the system. Tinkering, huh? Ellison smiled briefly, though it didn't reach his eyes. There's nothing tinkering about this. Amara, what you found, it's not just a solution. It's a breakthrough. She swallowed. The pressure was mounting, she could feel it creeping in from all sides. What had she done? She thought she was working on something personal, something hidden, but now, it was out in the open. And she wasn't sure if she was ready for that. I didn't mean to make a fuss, she said, her voice quieter now. I was just trying to figure it out. You figured it out, all right, Ellison said, his voice softer but more intense than before. You've touched on something no one else has seen. Something beyond the equation itself. A method, a principle that could change the way we understand this entire field. And it's your method, Amara. Not anyone else's. She nodded slowly, trying to process what he was saying, but she wasn't sure if she understood. She didn't have time to digest it, because just then, the door to the lab swung open, and a few of the grad students entered. Amara recognized a few of them, students from her advanced theory classes, and they immediately caught sight of the exchange between her and Ellison. The whispers started immediately. It was impossible to miss. Amara? What's going on here? One of the students, Rachel, asked, glancing from Ellison to Amara with an eyebrow raised. We're just here to finish the equations from the last lecture. Dr. Ellison straightened, turning his attention to the group now gathering around the table. I'm just reviewing some of the submissions, he said, his tone cool but layered with something else, something darker. It seems like Amara has made a discovery. Amara felt the heat of several pairs of eyes on her. She shifted uncomfortably but refused to meet their gazes directly. She could hear Rachel whispering to someone nearby, the words cutting through the air like a knife. That's impossible, Rachel muttered under her breath. She's been here for, what, a few months. Don't be naive, said Lucas, another grad student who had always made his disdain for Amara obvious. Ellison wouldn't be wasting time on someone who didn't know what they were doing. The comment stung. Amara clenched her fists, but she didn't respond. She couldn't. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of knowing how much it hurt. Instead, she focused on the notes in front of her, trying to hold on to the clarity she had gained in the past few days. You should take a look at this, Ellison said, turning to the group, clearly trying to assert some control over the situation. We'll discuss it tomorrow in my office. He turned back to Amara, his gaze softening for a moment. You've done excellent work, Amara. I'll expect you at 3 p.m. With that, Ellison stepped away, leaving Amara alone with the other students. Rachel shot her a look that was equal parts envy and disdain, while Lucas seemed to be calculating something in his head. Amara tried to keep her posture stiff, but she could feel the weight of their scrutiny pressing down. As they left the lab, the tension didn't dissipate. If anything, it grew thicker, like a storm waiting to break. The truth was, she hadn't expected this, didn't think anyone would even care about her work, let alone feel threatened by it. She thought she was hidden, safe in her anonymity. But now, it was out in the open. And she didn't know if she was ready for the fallout. For the first time, doubt crept into her thoughts. What if they were right? What if she didn't belong here after all? But then she looked back at her notebook, at the equations she had uncovered. The clarity of the idea. The brilliance of the method. And she knew, deep down, she couldn't let this moment slip by. It was time to finish what she had started. The next day was a blur. Amara barely registered the passing hours, the endless equations, or the mundane chatter around her. All she could think about was what had happened in the lab. Dr. Ellison's words echoed in her mind, "You've touched on something no one else has seen." It was like a mark on her, something that made her both proud and terrified. Her meeting with Dr. Ellison was scheduled for 3 in the afternoon, but as the time drew closer, the anxiety began to settle like a weight in her chest. The quiet girl from the back of the room had suddenly become a target. She had unknowingly thrust herself into the spotlight of Harvard's elite mathematics department, and now the eyes of the academic world, her world, were fixed on her. When she finally walked into Dr. Ellison's office, she was greeted by a strange mix of tension and curiosity. He was sitting behind his cluttered desk, his glasses perched on the end of his nose as he flipped through a stack of papers. When he saw her, he didn't immediately speak, just gestured for her to sit. "I've read through your work," he said, his voice low and measured. "I can't deny it, Amara. You've made a discovery." Amara sat down, her fingers curling around the edge of her notebook. I wasn't sure. It didn't feel like much. It's just a new angle, really." Ellison tilted his head, studying her. "A new angle, you say?" He chuckled, but it wasn't a dismissive laugh. "You've turned the entire approach on its head. You've redefined the way we look at this equation. People are going to want to know what you've done. They're going to want to understand how you got here." The words hit her like a bucket of cold water. She had expected praise, but not quite like this. Not the weight of the entire department's expectations pressing down on her shoulders. Not the realization that the eyes of the academic world, her world, were no longer distant, but right here in her face, waiting. "I just wanted to finish it," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "I wanted to solve it, to prove it wasn't beyond me." "You've done more than that," Ellison said, leaning forward. "You've cracked it. You found the one thing everyone missed. The part of the equation that's been missing all these years. Now we need to figure out what comes next." Amara swallowed, her throat tight. This was more than she had anticipated. The problem wasn't just solving the equation anymore, it was what happened after the solution had been found. Dr. Ellison pushed a folder across the desk toward her. "This is what the faculty wants to discuss with you. They're eager to hear your thoughts, and they want to understand the process you use to arrive at your conclusion. Amara stared at the folder, dread creeping into her stomach. She had known the day would come when she'd have to explain herself, but now that it was here, she wasn't sure she was ready. She had always worked alone, quietly, in her own space. The thought of exposing her mind, her process, to the critical eyes of Harvard's finest professors was enough to make her stomach churn. "I don't think I'm prepared for this," Amara said, her voice small. "I didn't expect anyone to even notice what I was doing." Ellison's expression softened. "I know it's overwhelming. But you've already taken the hardest step. You've figured out something the rest of us missed. Now, the question is whether you're ready to share it with the world." She shook her head slowly. "I don't know if I am." "Amara," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. "This is your moment. You've already set something in motion. People are going to want to know how you arrived at your conclusion, and when they find out, they'll be watching. This isn't just about your work anymore, it's about what you're going to do with it." Her breath hitched. The weight of it all felt too much. She had never wanted fame or recognition, she just wanted to solve the problem. But now the stakes were higher, and the pressure felt suffocating. "Do you think I'm ready?" she asked, her voice trembling just slightly. Dr. Ellison leaned back in his chair and looked at her thoughtfully. "I think you've already proven that you're ready. Now, the only thing left is to take the next step." Amara exhaled sharply. The next step. She could already feel the tremors of doubt creeping in, but there was something else, too. A spark of determination that, no matter how much she tried to ignore it, refused to go away. "Okay," she said finally, her voice steady but soft. "I'll do it." Ellison smiled. "Good. Now, let's prepare for what comes next." The rest of the afternoon passed in a haze of paperwork, meetings, and unfamiliar faces. Dar. Ellison had set up a formal review session with the department's faculty for the following week, and Amara's nerves were stretched thin. It wasn't just the math anymore, it was everything. The idea of presenting her discovery to the people who had been studying it for decades, the thought of them scrutinizing her work and perhaps even questioning her process, it was terrifying. She stayed late in the lab that evening, going over every detail again and again. Her notebook was filled with scribbled notes, equations, and possible next steps. But despite her preparation, the fear lingered. What if they rejected her discovery? What if they didn't understand? Worse, what if they accused her of missing something, of making a simple mistake? The lab was empty by the time she left, the fluorescent lights flickering faintly above. She didn't even bother to check her phone as she walked back to her dorm. She couldn't afford distractions. Not tonight. As she reached the door to her room, she paused. The silence inside felt oppressive. It was too quiet. Too still. She wasn't used to being alone in this way, with only her thoughts for company. Sitting at her desk, she opened her notebook again. For a long time, she just stared at the pages. The answers were right in front of her, clear as day. She had solved it. She had found the missing link. But the weight of the unknown, the pressure of being the one to carry this discovery forward, was almost more than she could bear. She closed the notebook and took a deep breath. There was no turning back now. The night before the big presentation, Amara couldn't sleep. She sat in her dorm room, the papers in front of her scattered across the desk like a jigsaw puzzle she had almost, but not quite, completed. Her mind was racing. The weight of tomorrow's meeting with the faculty, the professors, the leading minds in the field, everything felt so surreal. She glanced at her phone, seeing the time, 3:32 a.m. The ticking of the clock on her wall was the only sound filling the otherwise quiet room. Even though her eyes burned from exhaustion, she couldn't tear herself away from the equations sprawled before her. She kept double-checking everything. The breakthrough was solid, no doubt about that. But the fear kept creeping in, like an invisible force tugging at her confidence. What if she had missed something? What if she was wrong? She had read over the equations hundreds of times, but each time felt different. The numbers seemed to pulse on the page, taunting her with their complexity. Her mind had already gone over the solution so many times that it now felt like she was seeing things in the equations that weren't even there. Her nerves were eating her alive. The anticipation of tomorrow was like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing she had to jump but unsure if the parachute would open. Her phone buzzed suddenly, pulling her from her spiraling thoughts. She checked it quickly. Dr. Ellison, just checking in. You ready for tomorrow? Remember, you've got this. Amara let out a shaky breath. She typed back quickly, trying to sound more confident than she felt. Amara, I think so. Just need to go over everything one more time. Dr. Ellison's response came almost instantly. Dr. Ellison, you've done the hard part. Now it's just about sharing what you've learned with them. It'll be fine. His words were meant to reassure her, but all they did was heighten her awareness of the enormity of what was coming. She wasn't ready. She couldn't be ready. There was no way she could stand in front of the faculty tomorrow, present her work, and not fall apart. Still, she wasn't about to back down. She had worked too hard, spent too many sleepless nights, and sacrificed too much for this discovery. No matter the fear, no matter the doubt, she had come too far to turn back now. With a final, resigned sigh, she packed her things and prepared to go to bed. But sleep didn't come. Not for hours. And when she finally did drift off, it was only for a few fitful hours before the alarm blared. The next morning, Amara dressed quickly, trying to force a sense of calm over her body. Her hands trembled as she buttoned her shirt, as she slid into her shoes. It felt like a performance, like she was stepping into someone else's skin, trying to play the part of someone confident, someone who belonged in this space. She grabbed her papers, tucked them into a neat folder, and headed out. The campus was still quiet in the early morning, and as Amara made her way to the building, the familiar sense of isolation crept back over her. It had always been easy to hide, to blend in. But today, there would be no blending in. Today, she would stand in the spotlight, and there was no hiding from the truth. She reached the building where the meeting was to be held, the towering, ivory columns of the department looming in front of her. Her stomach turned. The glass doors felt like the gates to a fortress. She was walking into a room full of brilliant minds, people who had written textbooks, given lectures, and shaped the very field she was entering. She entered the conference room. Dr. Ellison was already there, seated at the head of a long table, papers scattered in front of him. Several other professors were seated around the table, scribbling notes and murmuring to each other. The atmosphere was thick with expectation. As Amara walked in, all eyes turned toward her. Amara, Dr. Ellison said, his voice carrying the weight of authority. Please, take a seat. Her heart was pounding in her chest. She sat down at the far end of the table, a few feet away from Dr. Ellison, but still close enough that she could feel the intensity of everyone's gaze. She set her papers down, her palms damp. It was all too much. Thank you all for coming, Dr. Ellison continued, addressing the faculty. As you know, Amara has made a significant breakthrough in the equation we've been trying to solve. We're here to discuss her findings and to evaluate her method. Amara, would you like to begin? The words hung in the air, their weight suffocating. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. Everyone was waiting for her to speak. She wasn't sure what to say at first, but then something inside of her clicked. She had done this before, hadn't she? She had been alone in her dorm room, working through the math, and now, here she was, standing in front of the very people who had been attempting to solve this for years. She cleared her throat and began, her voice shaking at first, but growing steadier with each word. I believe I've found a solution to the equation, she said. But it's not just the equation itself that's important. It's the method. I discovered that. Her words were interrupted by a sharp cough from Professor Lancaster, a senior faculty member who had been the most vocal critic of Amara's work. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "But I must ask, what exactly makes you think you've solved this? What makes your approach different from the hundreds of others who have come before you?" Amara's pulse quickened, but she forced herself to stay calm. She had anticipated questions like these. She had rehearsed the answers in her mind. "I approached the equation differently," she said, meeting his gaze. "I started with the underlying assumptions and worked backward. Instead of assuming certain variables were fixed, I examined them as dynamic. I found that the original equation wasn't flawed, it was incomplete. There was a piece missing. A variable that everyone overlooked." Dr. Ellison nodded approvingly, but Lancaster was unconvinced. "And how exactly did you discover this missing piece? You've only been here a few months. How could you have seen what others missed for years?" Amara's stomach churned, but she didn't flinch. She couldn't afford to. "I didn't stop looking. I kept pushing past the conventional limits of the equation. And I found something new. Something no one thought to look for. That's the difference. I didn't stop when everyone else did." There was a tense silence in the room. Every professor at the table was now watching her closely. Amara could feel their skepticism, their doubt. Was she really up to this? Was she really the one to solve it? But then Dr. Ellison spoke, his voice cutting through the tension. "I believe Amara's solution is valid," he said firmly. "The methods she used are sound. And if anything, they open new possibilities for how we approach the problem." Amara's heart hammered in her chest. Dr. Ellison was vouching for her. He was on her side. But as the meeting continued, the questions kept coming. The scrutiny, the doubts, the pressure, each one felt like another weight added to her shoulders. The spotlight was unbearable. She was no longer just a student. She was a symbol. A symbol of potential, of innovation, but also of the expectations that came with it. As the hours dragged on, Amara began to wonder if this was how the rest of her life would feel, under constant scrutiny, her every move dissected, her every achievement questioned. The faculty might have been impressed, but the pressure was mounting. The more they praised her work, the more she realized the burden she now carried. The days following her presentation were a blur of emails, messages, and meetings. At first, it felt like a whirlwind of excitement, a validation of everything she had worked for. But as the days passed, the sheer weight of her breakthrough began to settle in, pressing down on her like an unseen force, one that grew heavier with each passing hour. Amara found herself waking up to a new reality. The phone calls started coming in, professors from other universities, colleagues she had never met, and even media outlets, all wanting to talk to her, to understand the method behind her discovery. Her inbox was flooded with messages, many of them congratulatory, but others more skeptical, questioning her approach, demanding clarity. It was as if the world suddenly realized she wasn't just a quiet student in the back row anymore, she was a key player, one whose every move would be analyzed. Her thoughts, once consumed by equations, now turned inward. Was she ready for this? Was she capable of handling the sudden weight of the world's attention? In the midst of it all, she found herself alone. The phone calls came, the emails flooded in, but there was no one to help her process what was happening. Dr. Ellison, while supportive, was busy with his own responsibilities, and Amara had long stopped leaning on her classmates. They had all watched in awe as she presented her solution, but now it felt like they were on the outside, looking in. The friendships she had once valued now seemed distant. Was this the price of her discovery? The loneliness of standing at the pinnacle while everyone else stood far below. That evening, as Amara sat in her dorm room, her laptop open but untouched, she felt the weight of her isolation. She had spent years immersed in her studies, pushing herself to understand the equations that no one else seemed to care about. Now that she had solved the equation, she had become the center of attention, but it felt more like a cage than a victory. She stared at the screen, the blinking cursor mocking her indecision. She had tried to reach out to her mother earlier that day, but the call had gone to voicemail. It wasn't the first time. Her mother's busy work schedule kept her from being available when Amara needed her most. She leaned back in her chair, the weight of exhaustion pulling at her body. Maybe she had been wrong about what she wanted. Maybe this recognition, this success, wasn't as fulfilling as she had imagined. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. She stood up, grateful for the distraction, and opened it to find Dr. Ellison standing there, holding a cup of coffee in one hand. His familiar, comforting presence immediately put her on edge. She wasn't sure what he was here for, but something told her it wasn't just a casual check-in. "Amara," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "I think we need to talk." She closed the door behind him and gestured to the small desk in the corner of the room. "I assume this isn't just a social visit?" Ellison sat down, setting the coffee cup down in front of her. "No. I've been following your progress since the presentation, and I wanted to make sure you were doing okay." Amara blinked, feeling the unfamiliar tightness in her chest. "I don't know if I am," she said quietly, looking at the empty space between them. "Everything's moving so fast. I thought I wanted this. I thought this would feel like an accomplishment. But it doesn't." Ellison studied her for a moment, his eyes softening. "Amara, the world isn't going to slow down just because you need a break. People are going to keep pushing, keep demanding more from you. But that doesn't mean you have to give it all away. Your discovery is huge, but that doesn't mean you have to become a product of it. Don't lose yourself in the noise." She shook her head, her mind racing. "But what am I supposed to do? This is my one chance to prove myself, to show everyone that I'm not just some quiet student in the back of the class. I can't just ignore what's happening. I don't know how to handle it." Dr. Ellison leaned forward, his expression serious. "Amara, you've already proven yourself. You've solved an equation that no one else could. You've contributed something meaningful to the field. You don't need to keep proving it. What you need now is to find balance. Don't let the demands of the outside world consume you." The words settled in her chest like a balm, soothing the raw edges of her anxiety. For a moment, she allowed herself to believe him. But just as quickly, the weight of her situation came crashing back. It wasn't just the pressure from professors or colleagues, it was the fear of failure that had always haunted her, the idea that, at any moment, someone would find a flaw in her work. She had spent her entire life trying to prove that she belonged. Was she truly allowed to take a step back? "Dr. Ellison," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "what if I don't have all the answers? What if I made a mistake? What if this isn't the answer everyone's been waiting for?" He studied her quietly for a long time, as though weighing her question. "Amara, that's the nature of science. We're always in search of answers, and sometimes, we find more questions. No one has all the answers, not even the greatest minds in the field. What you've done is groundbreaking, but it's also part of a much larger conversation. No one expects perfection, just progress." She nodded slowly, the weight on her chest lightening, but only slightly. "I just feel like, everything is spiraling out of control." Dr. Ellison smiled, though there was a hint of concern behind it. "You're allowed to feel that way. You're allowed to be human. But you're also allowed to take control of this situation. No one can dictate how you handle this breakthrough, not your peers, not your professors, and certainly not the media. You're the one who gets to decide how much of yourself you give to this." For the first time in days, Amara felt a small flicker of relief. The chaos, the expectations, it was all still there, but hearing Dr. Ellison's words allowed her to breathe a little easier. She wasn't alone in this, and maybe, just maybe, she could figure out how to navigate the next steps without losing herself in the process. The next morning, Amara woke with a renewed sense of purpose. She had a lot to process, but she also knew that her journey wasn't over. She still had so much to learn, so much to discover. And the world of academia, while overwhelming, wasn't going anywhere. She had earned her place in it. Amara spent the day responding to the dozens of messages that had piled up over the weekend, replying with carefully worded responses, deflecting the harder questions. She had learned, in the last few days, the power of silence, of choosing when to speak and when to step back. She wasn't ready to explain everything, and she didn't need to. Dr. Ellison's advice echoed in her mind: you don't have to give it all away. And maybe, just maybe, that would be the key to surviving this breakthrough, the balance between her work and herself. Amara sat at her desk, her fingers hovering over the keyboard, unsure of how to respond. The screen in front of her was filled with dozens of email notifications, many of them from reporters, others from faculty members eager to discuss the ramifications of her discovery. Some congratulated her, while others asked probing questions, pushing for details about her methods, hoping to uncover some flaw or crack in her work. It felt like an endless cycle of questions, praise, and pressure. She had never anticipated this, never imagined how much her breakthrough would ripple out, pulling her into a world of constant scrutiny. The media had picked up her story, and soon, her face had appeared on several news outlets. They dubbed her the prodigy or the silent genius, labels that she never wanted, labels that she never asked for. It was all too much. Amara took a deep breath, trying to focus, but the weight of the situation was starting to wear on her. The world was watching her, waiting for her next move, and it felt like she was drowning under the relentless expectations. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from her mom. "Mom, I saw your interview on TV. I'm so proud of you. But you look exhausted. You sure you're okay?" Amara stared at the message, feeling a pang of guilt. She hadn't been able to talk to her mom much lately. She had been so caught up in the whirlwind of emails, interviews, and meetings that she hadn't taken the time to breathe, let alone check in with her family. It was like the world had swallowed her whole, and she was barely holding on. She quickly typed back, trying to reassure her. "Amara, I'm okay, just a bit overwhelmed. It's a lot to handle right now, but I'm managing." But even as she sent the message, she knew it wasn't the full truth. She wasn't managing. She was barely keeping it together. The constant pressure was getting to her. She had been spending sleepless nights answering emails, participating in interviews, and attending meetings with professors and colleagues who were all eager to discuss her work, but who never truly understood the personal cost of all this attention. It felt as though everyone else had a stake in her discovery, but no one cared about her well-being. She had lost count of the number of times someone had asked her to simplify her explanation of the breakthrough, as if she could reduce years of hard work and mental strain to a few simple sentences for the press. They didn't understand. They didn't understand what it felt like to be under this much pressure, to be constantly dissected, questioned, and criticized. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a call from Dr. Ellison. She hesitated for a moment, then answered. "Dr. Ellison?" Amara's voice was strained, even to her own ears. "Amara," he said, his tone warm and reassuring. "How are you holding up?" She sighed, the exhaustion weighing heavily in her voice. "Honestly, I don't know. I can't keep up with everything. The interviews, the emails, it's never ending. I'm drowning in all of it." "I know it's a lot," Dr. Ellison replied gently. "But I want you to remember something. You don't owe anyone anything. You've already proven yourself. Your work speaks for itself. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." "I feel like I'm losing control," Amara confessed, rubbing her forehead in frustration. "The more I try to keep up, the more I feel like I'm slipping away from myself. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up." Dr. Ellison was quiet for a moment, letting her words sink in. "Amara, you need to take a step back. This isn't sustainable. You need to set boundaries, both for your work and for yourself. You can't give everything to everyone. You'll burn out. I don't know how to stop, she admitted, her voice trembling. I'm scared. If I stop, if I don't answer these emails, if I don't take these calls, it feels like I'll lose everything. That's the fear talking, Dr. Ellison said, his voice firm but understanding. You've already accomplished more than most people will in their entire careers. But you can't sacrifice your health, your peace of mind, just to keep up with the expectations of others. You're in control of your own journey. Amara felt a small sense of relief hearing his words. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to breathe, to let go of the suffocating pressure. But she also knew he was right, she couldn't keep going like this. I don't know where to begin, she said softly. I've let it all get out of hand. That's okay, Dr. Ellison reassured her. Start small. Take a break. Say no to a few things. Focus on the work that truly matters to you. And remember, you're not alone in this. You have people who care about you and who want to see you succeed, not just professionally, but personally. Amara nodded, though he couldn't see it. I'll try, she said, her voice a little steadier now. Good, Dr. Ellison replied. And remember, no one's going to take your success away from you. It's yours to shape. After they hung up, Amara sat in silence for a moment, letting his words settle in. She wasn't sure how to implement all of the advice he had given her, but she knew one thing for sure, she couldn't keep pretending she was okay. That afternoon, Amara made her first step toward taking control. She sat down and sifted through the pile of emails waiting for her. She opened the first one, a request for an interview with a major news outlet. She considered it for a moment, then hit the decline button. It felt liberating, like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. The next email was from a colleague who wanted to meet and discuss her work further. Amara hesitated but then realized that she had already explained everything she could. She didn't need to explain it again. With a deep breath, she hit decline again. It wasn't easy. She felt a gnawing sense of guilt each time she said no. But as she continued, the guilt started to fade, replaced by a sense of control. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. That evening, Amara decided to take some time for herself. She went for a walk on the campus, breathing in the fresh air and feeling the weight of the world lift a little with each step. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow across the quad. For the first time in days, she felt like she could breathe again. She didn't have all the answers, and the pressure was still there. But she had taken the first step toward reclaiming her life. She was more than just the discovery. She was more than the pressure that came with it. She was Amara, and she would find a way to navigate this new chapter on her own terms. The weeks that followed her decision to take control of her life weren't easy. The emails kept coming, the requests for interviews didn't stop, and professors from across the country still asked for her input on their research. But Amara had made a conscious decision. She wasn't going to be swept away by the current anymore. She wasn't going to drown under the expectations placed on her. It was time to reclaim her life, piece by piece. Amara's first step was to limit her responses. She still answered the most important messages, the ones from her professors, colleagues, and anyone genuinely invested in her work, but the rest? She started ignoring them. If it was a media request, she'd decline with a polite but firm message, "Thank you for your interest, but I'm currently focusing on my research and personal well-being." If it was another request to simplify her explanation for a broader audience, she declined as well. At first, the guilt gnawed at her. She could feel the eyes of the world still on her, waiting for her to respond, for her to give them something. But as the days passed, that guilt began to fade, replaced by a quiet confidence. She didn't have to please everyone. Her work spoke for itself. Her nights were less filled with anxiety. She started sleeping again, the constant hum of her thoughts giving way to rest. She took time for herself, time to rediscover the things she loved before all of this started. On weekends, she would visit the small, quiet coffee shop near campus that she had frequented during her first year. The barista, a cheerful young woman named Sarah, had come to know Amara's regular order, a simple black coffee with a splash of oat milk. "Back for your usual?" Sarah asked, her smile wide as Amara walked up to the counter one Saturday morning. "Yeah, I need it today," Amara said with a smile, glad for the brief moment of normalcy. As Sarah handed her the cup, Amara felt a sense of calm. No equations, no interviews, just a quiet morning in a familiar space. Sitting by the window with her coffee in hand, Amara took a deep breath. The sunlight streamed through the glass, and for the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of peace settle in her chest. She was still unsure about everything, still uncertain about how she was going to balance her work with her personal life, but for now, she allowed herself to simply exist in the moment. Her phone buzzed on the table, but she ignored it. She was learning to choose what deserved her attention and what didn't. The next day, she took another step toward reclaiming her control. It had been weeks since she had last spoken with her family. She missed her mother terribly, and it was time to reconnect. She called her mom that evening, eager to catch up. "Hi, sweetheart," her mom answered, her voice full of warmth. "I saw your latest paper. You're still making waves, huh?" Amara smiled, feeling a mix of pride and exhaustion. "Yeah, but I've been taking a step back from the spotlight. I needed to. There's been a lot going on, and I just needed to breathe." Her mom's voice softened. "I can only imagine. I've been following the news. You're doing amazing things, but remember to take care of yourself. You're only human." Amara's heart warmed at her mother's words. It felt good to hear someone who truly understood her. "I know, Mom. I'm working on it. I've been cutting back, saying no to a lot of things." "Good," her mom replied. "Don't let them take more than you're willing to give." Amara nodded, even though her mom couldn't see her. "I'll be okay. I promise." As they talked, Amara realized just how much she had missed these conversations. They weren't about equations or discoveries. They were about her, about who she was beyond the numbers, beyond the expectations. She had been so focused on proving herself that she had neglected the things that truly mattered. And now, she was learning to put herself first. The next week, Amara made another decision. She was going to re-engage with her work, but on her terms. She sat down in her study, surrounded by her notebooks and research, and took a deep breath. Her breakthrough had been monumental, but she couldn't let it define every part of her existence. She needed to approach her research with a new mindset, one that wasn't driven by outside pressure, but by her own curiosity and love for the subject. She picked up her pen and started scribbling notes in her journal. There were new questions that intrigued her, new theories she wanted to explore. She had always been fascinated by the intersection of mathematics and real-world problems, and now, she was excited to dive deeper into those ideas. No more rushing. No more doing things because she felt she had to. This was her journey, and she would move at her own pace. Her next project would focus on the practical applications of her work. How her solution could be used in fields beyond pure mathematics. The possibilities were endless, and for the first time in a while, Amara felt that spark of excitement return. She was no longer chasing validation, she was chasing her passion. That afternoon, Dr. Ellison stopped by her office to check in. He smiled when he saw her working at her desk, her usual focus returned. "Looks like you're in your element again," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "I think I am," Amara replied, looking up from her work. "It feels good to be back." Dr. Ellison nodded, his expression approving. "You're doing the right thing, Amara. This is what science is about: curiosity, passion, and persistence. Not the pressure or the applause. You've got to remember why you started this journey in the first place." Amara smiled, her eyes bright. "I haven't forgotten. I just needed to remember it." They talked for a while longer, about her next steps and the future of her research. For the first time in weeks, Amara felt like she was in control again. She wasn't being pulled in 100 different directions. She wasn't letting anyone else dictate her path. Later that evening, she took a moment to reflect on everything that had happened. She thought about the frantic days immediately after her breakthrough, the overwhelming demands, the exhaustion. And she thought about how far she had come since then. It wasn't just about the research anymore. It was about finding balance, about being true to herself, and about choosing what mattered most. She was learning to set boundaries, to say no when it was necessary, and to prioritize her well-being. But most importantly, she was learning to trust herself again, to trust that she could find her way without the constant noise and pressure. For the first time in a long time, Amara felt at peace. The world could wait. She was on her own journey now, and no one could take that from her. The next few weeks were some of the most fulfilling Amara had experienced in a long time. The pressure from the outside world had dimmed, and she had learned to protect her peace. But now, as she returned to her research, the excitement of discovery sparked within her again, lighting a fire she hadn't realized she'd lost. Amara was seated at her desk one chilly autumn afternoon, her focus entirely on the problem at hand. She had been revisiting the original equation that had thrust her into the spotlight, but now, she was venturing into uncharted territory, applying her findings to real-world problems. Her mind raced through the possibilities. How could this new understanding of patterns and behaviors influence fields beyond mathematics? What was the practical application of her work? She had always been interested in the intersection of mathematics and real-world phenomena, particularly in economics and environmental sciences. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that the implications of her discovery could extend far beyond the walls of academia. It could change the way complex systems were understood in multiple domains. As she dove deeper into the equations, Amara's focus sharpened. She worked late into the night, poring over research papers, running simulations, and taking meticulous notes. She had formulated a hypothesis: if her findings could be applied to predictive modeling in economics, they might help forecast economic recessions with much greater accuracy. And on a grander scale, perhaps her work could contribute to mitigating the effects of climate change by modeling and predicting ecological shifts. The idea was audacious, and it made Amara's heart race with excitement. The breakthrough that had seemed so abstract now had tangible, real-world potential. As she worked through the night, Amara's phone buzzed on the desk. It was a text from Dr. Ellison. "Dr. Ellison, how's the research going? I've been thinking about you lately. Let me know if you need anything." Amara smiled. She had grown to appreciate Dr. Ellison's mentorship and kindness, especially now that she was able to see the bigger picture of her work, rather than feeling overwhelmed by it. He was always there when she needed a word of encouragement, and tonight, his text was a small comfort in the midst of her intense focus. She quickly typed back. "Amara, it's going really well, actually. I've started working on some real-world applications of the equation. I think I'm onto something big." The response came quickly. "Dr. Ellison, that's incredible. I knew you'd get there. Let me know if you want to brainstorm together. And remember, don't burn yourself out, balance is key." Amara couldn't help but laugh. She had a tendency to get lost in her work, but Dr. Ellison was right. Balance had to come first. She typed back. "Amara, thanks. I won't forget. But I'm really excited about this new direction." With renewed energy, Amara went back to her desk, eager to explore the applications she had been envisioning. She spent the next few days running simulations, testing her hypothesis, and adjusting her models. It was thrilling to see her ideas take shape in real time, but there were moments of doubt, moments when the complexity of the problem seemed too much to bear. The math was dense, and the data sets she was working with were enormous. But Amara had learned not to back down from a challenge. Each time she felt a pang of doubt, she reminded herself, "I'm more than the pressure. This is my passion, my work, my discovery. Her simulations started to show promising results. The models began to predict patterns in economic data with remarkable precision, and her environmental simulations offered new insights into the potential long-term effects of climate change. As she pored over the data, a surge of excitement washed over her. This was more than just theory, it was tangible, real, and it had the potential to make a difference. The following week, Amara decided it was time to share her findings with Dr. Ellison. They had talked about this moment for weeks, the moment when her research could evolve into something truly impactful. Amara gathered her notes and simulations into a comprehensive presentation, feeling the weight of the work she had done. It was time to take the next step. She arranged a meeting with Dr. Ellison and, in the early hours of the morning, joined him in his office. The air inside was cool, the faint sound of rain pattering against the window. The space felt comforting, like a sanctuary from the world's chaos. "Good morning, Amara," Dr. Ellison said with a warm smile. "You look like you've been working hard. I hope you're taking care of yourself." Amara smiled, a little sheepish. "I'm trying to," she said, though she couldn't hide the excitement in her voice. "I've been working on something I think is really important. I want to show you what I've come up with." Dr. Ellison gestured for her to sit and handed her a cup of coffee. "I'm eager to see it." Amara set her laptop on the desk and pulled up her presentation. As she walked Dr. Ellison through her findings, she couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. She had spent so long doubting herself, unsure if her breakthrough could have real-world implications. Now, here she was, showing someone who had always believed in her that she had taken her research to new heights. "Amara," Dr. Ellison said after a long pause, his voice thoughtful. "This is impressive. Truly groundbreaking work. You've managed to apply your theory to real-world systems in a way that few mathematicians could. Your predictions are more accurate than anything I've seen." Amara felt a rush of relief and excitement. The validation she had longed for seemed to be materializing, not through outside praise, but through the work itself. She hadn't needed to prove anything to anyone. She had simply needed to follow her passion. "I'm excited, Dr. Ellison," she said. "I really think this could change the way we look at things like economic forecasting and climate modeling." He nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "I agree. And you know what? I think it's time we took this further. We need to publish this. It's not just a mathematical breakthrough, it's a tool that can be used in multiple fields. I can help you get it published in the right journals, but I think we're looking at something that could have a real-world impact." Amara's heart raced. The thought of taking her work to a global audience was thrilling, but it also scared her. She had worked so hard to reclaim her peace and balance, and now, the pressure was starting to build again. But this time, it felt different. This time, she wasn't doing it for anyone else. She was doing it because it mattered to her, and because it could make a difference. "Let's do it," Amara said, her voice filled with determination. "Let's take this to the world." Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The following weeks were a whirlwind for Amara. She had stepped into a new world, a world where her research, her discoveries, could be shared with scholars, institutions, and possibly even change the trajectory of entire industries. What had once been a quiet, personal passion was now something that could spark a revolution in mathematics and beyond. But the journey to publish wasn't as easy as she had hoped. Despite the excitement and support she had from Dr. Ellison, Amara quickly realized that the process was far more complicated than she had anticipated. There were committees to deal with, peer reviews to navigate, and, most daunting of all, the fear of rejection looming overhead. She'd seen it happen to colleagues before, brilliant researchers whose work was dismissed for reasons beyond their control. The thought of her work being dismissed, despite how groundbreaking it was, made her stomach churn. "I'm not sure I'm ready for this," Amara confessed to Dr. Ellison one afternoon as they sat in his office, surrounded by piles of research papers and statistical models. "You don't have to be ready for all of it at once," he said, offering her a reassuring smile. "Start with the first step. We'll submit it to a well-respected journal, and from there, we can take things one review at a time. There's a lot of uncertainty, yes, but this is your time, Amara. Your work deserves to be seen." Amara nodded, still feeling the weight of the decision. But Dr. Ellison was right. She had already taken the first step by diving into her research. Now, it was time to take the next, making sure the world knew about it. The journal they decided to target was one of the leading publications in applied mathematics and interdisciplinary research. The editors there were known for their rigorous standards, but also for their willingness to publish groundbreaking work, no matter the field. As Amara sat down to draft the submission letter, her hands trembled slightly. She had done the math, the simulations, the tests, everything was in place. But now, she had to convince the editors that her work wasn't just good, but revolutionary. She spent hours fine-tuning her paper, making sure it was clear, concise, and comprehensive. She knew this wasn't just about the math, it was about showing the broader significance of her findings. Her research had the potential to reshape fields like economics, environmental science, and even public policy. It wasn't just a series of equations, it was a new way of thinking about complex systems. Amara wrote, "Dear editors, I am submitting a manuscript titled Predicting Economic and Environmental Systems, a new mathematical framework for modeling complex patterns. The work presents a breakthrough in understanding the hidden patterns within complex systems and offers a new approach for predictive modeling in fields such as economics and climate science. This work has the potential to improve forecasting accuracy in economic recessions and provide deeper insights into environmental shifts. I believe this research has broad interdisciplinary applications and would be of great interest to your readership. Thank you for considering this submission. I look forward to your feedback." She paused, rereading the letter before clicking the Submit button. Her heart raced in her chest. She had done it. She had taken the leap. The following weeks were a blur of anticipation. Amara continued with her research, focusing on the next phase of her work. But the thought of the submission loomed over her, distracting her at times, stealing her concentration. She kept telling herself that it was out of her hands now. She had done everything she could, and now it was up to the journal's peer reviewers to decide the fate of her work. Then, one rainy Thursday afternoon, an email notification popped up on her phone. Her heart skipped a beat. It was from the journal. "Amara?" Dr. Ellison's voice was calm when he called her into his office that afternoon, but she could hear the anticipation in it. "We've received the review." Amara's stomach flipped as she sat across from him, her palms sweating. She had imagined this moment countless times, each one filled with dread. What if they rejected her work? What if they found flaws in her theories? She had worked so hard, and the thought of it all crumbling was unbearable. Dr. Ellison opened the email, and after a moment of silence, he looked up at her with a smile. "It's good news, Amara. They've accepted the paper, after a few revisions." Amara's breath caught in her throat. What? "They want to publish it, but they've asked for some minor adjustments before they proceed. Nothing major, just some clarifications and additional data for context." Amara's face broke into a wide grin, and a weight she didn't even know she was carrying lifted from her shoulders. She had done it. Her work was going to be published. For the next few days, Amara worked through the revisions. It wasn't as difficult as she had feared. The reviewers had pointed out areas where her explanations could be clearer, and they had asked for more detailed comparisons with existing models in the fields of economics and climate science. With Dr. Ellison's guidance, Amara addressed each point carefully, refining her paper until it was even stronger than before. When the final version was ready, she hit Submit once again, and this time, she felt the rush of finality. It was out of her hands. All that was left now was to wait for the journal's final approval. In the meantime, Amara continued with her research, now focused on the next step, finding practical applications for her model in real-world situations. She had been in touch with a few economists who had expressed interest in her work, and she began collaborating with them to test her model's predictions in live economic environments. The work was thrilling, but also challenging. Amara realized that transitioning from theory to practice was never a straight line. But it was also where the true potential of her discovery lay. Weeks passed, and Amara's life began to settle into a new rhythm. She was still working hard, but now there was a sense of fulfillment in her research. She was making a real impact, not just in the academic world, but in the way people understood the systems that shaped their lives. Then, one evening, as she sat in her apartment with a cup of tea, she received another email. This time, it was from Dr. Ellison. Dear Amara. Congratulations. Your work has been accepted for publication in the Journal of Applied Mathematics. Your research will be featured in the upcoming issue. I am incredibly proud of you and all the hard work you've put into this project. Amara sat back in her chair, staring at the email, her heart swelling with pride. It was official. Her work, her breakthrough, was now part of the academic world's conversation. It was a moment she would never forget, a moment that marked the culmination of years of effort, sacrifice, and dedication. She had done it. Amara had always dreamed of making a difference. But now that her research was officially published, the reality of her success felt overwhelming. As the publication date drew nearer, the emails and requests began pouring in. It wasn't just from academics, journalists, conference organizers, even government agencies. Everyone wanted a piece of her groundbreaking discovery. The pressure was mounting, and with it, the unspoken expectation that she would continue to push the boundaries of her work. At first, Amara relished the attention. After years of working in obscurity, her hard work was finally being recognized. She felt proud of what she had accomplished, and rightly so. But with every interview request and public speaking opportunity, the weight of it all became more apparent. The fame was not just flattering, it was demanding. Amara, you're on fire right now, her best friend Rachel said over the phone one evening. You've got conference invitations coming out of your ears. The world's finally seeing what we always knew about you. Amara laughed, but the sound was hollow. I don't know if I'm ready for all of this. It's overwhelming, Rach. I'm still trying to figure out the next step with my research, and now everyone's looking at me. I didn't sign up for all of this attention. Rachel's voice softened. I get it, but you've worked for this. This is your moment. You've got the chance to change the world with your work, Amara. You can't shy away from that just because it's a little scary. Take it one step at a time. Amara knew Rachel was right. She had wanted this. But there was a difference between dreaming about something and living it. Now that the spotlight was on her, she felt both proud and terrified at the same time. The first public appearance came quickly. A high-profile academic conference where she was scheduled to present her work. Amara was invited to give a keynote address, an honor she never expected. It would be the first time she was speaking to an audience beyond her professors and close colleagues. The idea of standing before hundreds of experts in the field filled her with a mix of exhilaration and anxiety. Amara, you've got this, Dr. Ellison said as they prepared for her presentation. You've worked tirelessly for this. Remember, these people want to hear from you, not just about your math, but about your passion. You're not just presenting numbers, you're sharing an idea that could change the world. Amara nodded, though she could feel the nerves creeping in. She had given presentations before, but this felt different. This wasn't just a research paper, it was a statement. A declaration that she belonged in the academic world, a world that had so often made her feel like an outsider. As the day of the conference arrived, Amara dressed in a simple black suit, trying to calm the nervous fluttering in her chest. The venue was grand, a sprawling hall filled with influential mathematicians and scientists from around the world. The air buzzed with conversation, but for Amara, it felt like the world had narrowed to a pinpoint. Her mind raced. Was she really ready for this? Was she prepared to stand before the giants of academia and present something so new, so untested? Dr. Ellison, do you think I should add more about the implications for climate change? Amara asked, her voice trembling slightly as she looked over her slides. Trust yourself, Dr. Ellison said gently. You've already done the hard part. Now you just need to speak from the heart. Don't worry about perfection. You're here because of the work you've done, and that's enough. With a deep breath, Amara walked to the podium. The first few moments were a blur. Amara stood before the audience, feeling like an imposter in a sea of seasoned professionals. But as she began speaking, her nerves started to settle. The passion she had for her work flowed through her words. She described her journey from struggling with the equation to discovering a method that could predict complex systems in economics and environmental science. Her slides flashed across the screen, showing the elegant beauty of the mathematics, the simplicity in the chaos. As the talk progressed, Amara grew more comfortable. The audience seemed engaged, their eyes fixed on her. When she wrapped up, the applause that followed felt overwhelming. It wasn't just polite clapping, it was genuine, enthusiastic. The kind of response that made Amara realize that she wasn't just a newcomer anymore. She had something important to say, and the world was listening. Afterward, Amara was surrounded by a crowd of academics eager to discuss her work. Some asked technical questions, others offered their congratulations, but there was one conversation that stood out from the rest. A senior professor from a renowned economics institution, Dr. Harrison, approached her. Amara, your work is remarkable, he said, shaking her hand firmly. I've never seen anything quite like it. I would love to collaborate on a project that could integrate your equations into our predictive models for global financial markets. The potential for this research is beyond anything we've considered. Amara's eyes widened. That's incredible, she said, her heart pounding. I'd be honored to collaborate. The interaction left her feeling exhilarated but also more aware of the immense responsibility that came with her work. She was no longer just an observer of the academic world. She was now a player, and the expectations were only growing. The spotlight, though exhilarating, was not without its challenges. As Amara returned to her hotel room that evening, she felt a heavy weight on her shoulders. The conference had been a success, but the demands weren't over. She still had interviews to give, papers to revise, and new collaborations to manage. More than ever, it seemed like there was no time to breathe. Her phone buzzed with a message from Dr. Ellison. Dr. Ellison, you did great today, Amara. You're starting to make waves. But remember, don't get lost in the noise. Keep your focus on the work. The world may notice you now, but it's your research that will stand the test of time. Amara stared at the message for a moment, taking in its meaning. Dr. Ellison was right. It wasn't about the accolades or the attention. It was about the work, about using her discoveries to make a real difference in the world. But the truth was, the pressure was mounting. As she thought about the future, Amara knew that she would need to find a way to maintain her sense of balance, even as the world around her began to spin faster. For now, though, she had taken the first step. And no matter how overwhelming the spotlight felt, she was ready to walk into it. The next few weeks passed in a blur for Amara. Her research was no longer just a personal pursuit, it had become a global conversation. The emails continued to flood her inbox, the invitations to speak at conferences kept coming in, and her phone buzzed constantly with messages from colleagues, journalists, and strangers praising her work. Amara had become a symbol of something bigger than herself, a quiet revolution in mathematics and systems modeling. But with this newfound fame came something else. The weight of expectation. As much as she had dreamed of making an impact, Amara hadn't anticipated how exhausting it would be to constantly prove herself. Every conversation, every meeting, every email felt like a test. It wasn't just about the science anymore, it was about her ability to stay on top of everything, to maintain the momentum, and to continue delivering. Even Dr. Ellison, her mentor and friend, had begun to express concern. "Amara, I see you're taking on a lot," he said one day as they met in his office to discuss the progress of their joint research projects. "The collaborations, the interviews, the demands. You're burning the candle at both ends." Amara shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "I have to keep moving forward, Dr. Ellison. I can't slow down. This is my moment. If I don't capitalize on it, it will slip away. You saw what happened with those who got overlooked before." Dr. Ellison sighed and leaned back in his chair. "I understand. But there's more to success than just keeping the momentum going. You can't let the pressure steal your joy for the work. It's okay to pause, to take a breath. Your discoveries are important, but so are you. You have to look after yourself, too." Amara knew he was right. The stress had been building up for weeks, and she could feel it. She was constantly running on empty, trying to juggle everything. There were nights when she couldn't sleep, her mind racing with thoughts of the next interview, the next deadline, the next conference. It felt like there was always something more to be done. The weight of expectations was crushing, and she didn't know how much longer she could keep it up. It wasn't just the academic world that was demanding more of her. Amara's personal life was beginning to suffer as well. Her friends had started noticing her growing distance, and Rachel, her best friend, was the first to call her out on it. "Amara, we haven't hung out in weeks," Rachel said one evening, as they met for coffee at their usual spot. "You're always working or in meetings. You've barely responded to my texts. What's going on?" Amara looked down at her cup, feeling the sting of guilt. "I've just been busy. So much is going on right now, Rach. I can't let anything slip. I have to keep moving forward." Rachel shook her head. "I get it, but you're burning yourself out. You're acting like the world will collapse if you don't say yes to everything. You need a break. You can't be everything to everyone." Amara bit her lip, her heart heavy. She hadn't realized how much she'd been neglecting the people who mattered most to her. She had always prided herself on being a focused, driven individual, but now, she was starting to lose touch with the things that had always grounded her, her relationships, her sense of self, her sense of peace. "Amara, remember that all this success won't mean anything if you lose yourself in it. You're amazing, but you need to take care of yourself too," Rachel added softly. Amara nodded, but the words felt like a distant echo. She couldn't help but think about everything she had worked for, the opportunities she had been given. If she took a step back, would the world lose interest in her work? Would the spotlight shift to someone else? The pressure continued to mount, and Amara's next big challenge came sooner than she expected. Dr. Harrison, the senior professor who had approached her at the conference, was eager to move forward with the collaboration they had discussed. The project was ambitious, incorporating her mathematical framework into global economic forecasting models. It had the potential to change the way financial markets were analyzed and predicted. It was the kind of project that could make her a household name. But it also came with a tremendous amount of responsibility. "Amara, we're excited to have you on board for this," Dr. Harrison had said during their first meeting to discuss the collaboration. "This could be a game changer. Your model is exactly what the field needs right now. But, of course, it will require a lot of your time and attention. We need to get this right." Amara had agreed, knowing that turning down the opportunity wasn't an option. But as she started working with Dr. Harrison's team, the weight of the task at hand began to sink in. There were countless meetings to attend, data sets to analyze, and complex simulations to run. The pressure to perform was palpable, and it became harder and harder to balance this new commitment with the growing demands of her other projects. The turning point came one evening when Amara found herself sitting in front of her computer, eyes bloodshot from staring at data for hours. She had promised herself she would finish the latest draft of her joint paper with Dr. Ellison that night, but the words weren't coming. Instead, her mind kept spiraling. She thought about the collaboration with Dr. Harrison, the interviews piling up, the emails from journalists, and the pressure to deliver. She thought about the guilt she felt for not spending more time with Rachel, for not taking a break. Suddenly, it hit her, a wave of exhaustion and doubt so overwhelming that it knocked the breath out of her. She wanted to run away from it all. She wanted to scream. Amara closed her laptop and leaned back in her chair, letting the tears fall. It wasn't just the research or the work, it was the weight of trying to meet everyone's expectations. She had sacrificed so much to get to this point, but in doing so, she had lost pieces of herself along the way. She felt lost. After a few minutes, she wiped her eyes and took a deep breath. Maybe Dr. Ellison was right. Maybe it was time to slow down, time to take a breath, to reset, and to remember why she started this journey in the first place. The next morning, Amara sent an email to Dr. Ellison. She wasn't ready to quit, but she knew she needed help finding balance. She needed guidance on how to handle the weight of everything that was happening. Dr. Ellison. I wanted to reach out and talk about the current state of things. I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed. Between the collaborations, the media attention, and everything else, I feel like I'm losing sight of why I started this work. I want to continue making an impact, but I also want to make sure I'm taking care of myself. Any advice would be helpful. She clicked send, her heart heavy, but with a sense of relief. For the first time in a while, she felt like she wasn't alone in this. Maybe the key to success wasn't in doing more, but in finding a way to do it all with purpose, with intention. Amara sat quietly in her apartment, a mug of tea in hand, the soft hum of the city outside her window. It had been a week since she had sent the email to Dr. Ellison, and the silence since then felt both comforting and unsettling. She had taken his advice to heart, she had stopped overloading herself with commitments, allowing her schedule to breathe a little. It wasn't easy at first. Her instinct was to keep pushing, to keep moving forward, but the slow pace felt like a balm to her frayed nerves. The first change came in small, seemingly insignificant ways. She started sleeping better, finally letting herself rest without the nagging voice of her to-do list. She reconnected with Rachel, spending time over coffee without talking about work. And for the first time in weeks, she didn't feel like the walls were closing in. The world, instead of moving at lightning speed, felt like it was in slow motion, a pace that was, for once, manageable. The breakthrough didn't happen overnight. It wasn't some grand epiphany or a sudden stroke of genius. It was, instead, a gradual return to herself, to the quiet moments that reminded her why she had entered this field in the first place. She hadn't chosen mathematics for fame or accolades, she had chosen it because she loved the elegance of numbers, the way they could unlock the mysteries of the universe. But even as she found some peace, the tension in her work still simmered beneath the surface. The project with Dr. Harrison was moving forward at an alarming rate. The team's enthusiasm about applying her model to financial markets was palpable, and Amara couldn't deny how exciting it was. But there was also an undercurrent of pressure. She had to deliver, there was no other option. She couldn't afford to let her work falter now, not with the eyes of the world on her. It was during one of the late nights spent revisiting the model that the breakthrough came. Amara had been sitting at her desk for hours, staring at the complex equations on her screen. The numbers swirled together, a beautiful but maddening dance that she had been trying to make sense of for days. The new direction of the project had pushed her to apply her research to real-world systems more directly, and though the model had shown promise, something still didn't feel right. The data didn't quite fit. It was as if there was an unseen variable, something missing. Frustrated, she leaned back in her chair, rubbing her eyes. The city outside her window was quiet now, the streets lit by the yellow glow of street lamps. The peacefulness seemed to mock her turmoil. She had come so far, and yet, something was holding her back. What was it? Then, a thought struck her. What if the issue wasn't with the data? What if the solution was in the way she was applying her model, in the assumptions she had made about the world? Her heart raced as the thought gained clarity. What if there was another, more intuitive way to approach the problem? What if the complexity she was seeing was simply a reflection of a deeper simplicity, a principle that could explain not just the markets, but a wider range of systems that were interconnected in ways no one had yet realized? She opened a new document, quickly sketching out her ideas, her mind racing. The more she thought about it, the more it made sense. She had been so caught up in the details that she had overlooked the bigger picture. The breakthrough wasn't just about refining the model, it was about shifting the lens through which she viewed the data. It wasn't just about solving for the variables, it was about seeing the entire system in a new light. As the new equations took shape, a sense of clarity washed over her. She felt as if she had uncovered something monumental, something that had been just out of reach for so long. The beauty of it was not just in the elegance of the math but in its potential to change how entire systems could be understood, predicted, and controlled. Amara's pulse quickened. This was it. This was the insight she had been searching for. The next morning, Amara called Dr. Ellison. "I think I've got it," she said, her voice filled with excitement. "I've found a new way to apply the model. It's simpler than I thought. But it makes everything so much clearer." There was a pause on the other end of the line before Dr. Ellison responded, his tone warm. "I knew you'd get there, Amara. Take your time with this. It sounds like you've hit on something important." She sat back, the weight of the past few weeks lifting off her shoulders. The breakthrough wasn't just a scientific achievement, it was the beginning of a new approach to her work. For the first time in a long time, she felt a spark of excitement, not just about the potential impact of her discovery, but about the process itself, the journey of discovery that had brought her here. Later that day, Amara sat down at her desk and began to sketch out the new framework. It was beautiful in its simplicity. As she worked, she realized that her own personal journey mirrored the work she was doing. Her path had been filled with complex equations and variables, moments of struggle, moments of doubt, moments when everything seemed out of reach. But now, she had found clarity, just as she had with her work. She had learned to simplify her approach, to take a step back and trust herself again. This was the breakthrough she had needed, not just in her research, but in her life. She realized that the pressure of expectations, the endless demand for more, had clouded her vision. In order to make the impact she desired, she had to stay true to herself. The work, the equations, the discoveries, they were all important. But so was her peace of mind. Her well-being. Her relationships. The next day, Amara sent Dr. Harrison the new model, along with a detailed explanation of how it could be applied to the economic forecasting project. She was nervous, this was a bold new approach, and there was always a chance that it wouldn't work the way she hoped. But the excitement in her chest outweighed the fear. When she received his response a few hours later, her hands trembled as she opened the email. "Amara, this is groundbreaking. We'll need to refine some of the parameters, but this is exactly the kind of shift we need. I'm impressed. Let's move forward with this approach." Amara exhaled deeply, the weight she had carried for weeks finally lifting. She had done it. Not just for the project, but for herself. She had found her voice again. As she walked outside to clear her head, Amara took a moment to reflect. The breakthrough had been more than just an intellectual leap, it had been a moment of reconnection with herself. She had rediscovered why she started this journey, not to meet other people's expectations, but to contribute something valuable to the world in her own way. She knew that this was only the beginning. There would still be challenges ahead, but she had learned that the key wasn't in trying to do everything, it was in focusing on what truly mattered. For the first time in a long time, Amara felt at peace. She was ready for whatever came next, knowing that she was in control of her own path. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity for Amara. After the breakthrough, everything seemed to accelerate, and the momentum of her discovery felt like a snowball gaining speed. Yet, despite the excitement, there was a quiet tension beneath the surface, a realization that her work was no longer just about her, it was about the world she had helped shape. She stood in front of a crowded conference hall, her heart pounding. The atmosphere in the room was electric, the audience waiting for her presentation. This was her first major public appearance since the breakthrough. The economic forecasting project with Dr. Harrison was now public knowledge, and Amara had been invited to speak about her work at an international symposium on global economics and predictive models. As she stepped up to the podium, she looked out over the sea of faces, colleagues, experts, and strangers, many of whom were eager to hear the details of her new model. For a moment, doubt crept in. What if they didn't get it? What if her approach wasn't enough? After all, she had never been someone who enjoyed the limelight. She preferred her quiet space of research, her equations, her thoughts. But today was different. Today, her work was meant to change the way the world saw complex systems. With a deep breath, she began. I stand before you not just as a mathematician, she started, her voice steady despite the nervous tremor in her hands. I stand before you as someone who believes that the answers to some of the world's most pressing problems, economic instability, environmental shifts, even the balance of power in global politics, can be understood through systems of relationships, of interconnections. The audience was silent, hanging on her every word. Amara continued, presenting the core ideas of her model, how it could predict complex market shifts and economic disruptions with a higher degree of accuracy than any existing model. She shared the elegance of her approach, the simplicity of its core principles, and the potential for its application on a global scale. She spoke for an hour, her voice growing stronger with each passing minute. It was no longer about proving herself, it was about sharing something important. The audience, once skeptical, was now captivated, their interest piqued by the clarity and brilliance of her ideas. When the presentation finally ended, the applause was deafening. Amara stood there for a moment, feeling a surge of gratitude wash over her. She had done it, not just for the accolades, but for the impact she hoped her work could have. After the session, a line of attendees gathered to ask questions, eager to delve deeper into the specifics of her research. Among them was Dr. Harrison, who had flown in to hear her speak. His face wore a proud, satisfied grin as he approached her. That was remarkable, Amara, he said, his tone full of admiration. The way you framed everything, it's going to change the game. You've opened up a new way of thinking. Amara smiled, but something in her felt heavy. She was grateful for the praise, but she couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling in her stomach. It was a feeling she had been pushing away for weeks now, the sense that, despite all the excitement and recognition, there was more at stake here than just her career. The expectations surrounding her were growing, and with them, the burden of responsibility. A few days later, Amara found herself in a quiet cafe, sipping tea as she watched the world go by. Rachel had insisted on meeting her, despite Amara's initial reluctance. She was thankful for it now, the conversation was just what she needed. You were amazing, Amara, Rachel said, her eyes bright with excitement. You've become a star overnight. I knew you had it in you. Amara chuckled, but the laughter didn't quite reach her eyes. It feels strange, Rach. The attention, the expectations, it's a lot. It's like the more I accomplish, the more they want from me. I'm not sure how much more I can give. Rachel leaned forward, her expression softening. I get it. The pressure's huge. But you've always been the one who knew what she wanted, who pushed through no matter what. This is just the next step. But you can't lose yourself in it, Amara. Don't forget what matters most. I'm trying to keep it in perspective, but every time I take a breath, there's something new waiting for me, Amara confessed, her voice tight. And now I've got more invitations, more projects coming in, all because of this breakthrough. It feels like I'm expected to be perfect, to have all the answers. Rachel smiled gently. You don't have to be perfect, Amara. You just have to keep being yourself. Amara took a deep breath, her mind racing with the advice. Keep being yourself. The words lingered with her long after they finished their conversation, and as she walked back to her apartment, Amara found herself reflecting on everything that had changed. The next few days brought more invitations, more collaborations, more offers to publish her work, more requests for interviews and public appearances. The pressure mounted as she continued to juggle everything, and the weight of it began to feel more oppressive. Amara knew she couldn't keep up this pace forever. Her body ached from the constant strain, and her mind felt as if it were on the verge of burnout. The more she accomplished, the more the world demanded from her. She found herself wondering, again and again, whether this was what she had wanted all along. She had dreamed of making a difference, of creating a breakthrough that would be remembered. But was it worth losing herself in the process? It was during one of these sleepless nights, as Amara sat at her desk, her head resting in her hands, that a thought emerged, quiet but persistent. What if the next step wasn't about doing more? What if the next step was about choosing a path that aligned with who I am? She had always believed that her work could change the world. But perhaps it was time to ask herself, how could it change the world in a way that was true to her vision and not someone else's? Amara picked up her phone and dialed Dr. Ellison's number. After a few rings, his voice came on the line. Amara, it's good to hear from you. How are you? Amara paused, her heart pounding. I've been thinking a lot about the future, about the path ahead. I'm grateful for everything that's happened, but I don't know if I want to keep going down this road. I've been offered more collaborations, more visibility, but I'm starting to feel like I'm losing sight of why I began this work in the first place. Dr. Ellison was silent for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was calm. Amara, I've always known you were destined for greatness. But greatness doesn't mean you have to do everything, or be everything, for everyone. You need to create a path that is yours. One that allows you to make the impact you want without losing yourself in the process. Amara nodded, the weight on her shoulders beginning to lift. Thank you. I think I know what I need to do now. The next few days were a whirlwind of introspection for Amara. After her conversation with Dr. Ellison, she had realized something profound. The constant drive to do more, to meet the world's expectations, had overshadowed the reason she had started her journey in the first place. This wasn't just about solving equations or advancing in her career, it was about contributing something meaningful to the world, on her own terms. She needed to find a way to move forward that was true to who she was, not just to what others expected of her. The first step in this process was deciding what she wanted her future to look like. Amara had always been driven, but now, she wanted to make sure her ambition didn't come at the cost of her happiness. She didn't want to lose herself in the hustle. One evening, as she sat in her favorite cafe, Amara opened her laptop. The screen glowed softly in the dim light, but instead of diving into her work, she opened a blank document. She began to write. First, a list of things she valued most: personal growth, intellectual curiosity, creating a positive impact, and having meaningful relationships. As she wrote, her thoughts became clearer. She realized she wanted to dedicate herself to projects that allowed for deep, thoughtful work, projects that didn't require her to be a media figure or a constant source of public spectacle. But there was a catch. The more successful her work became, the more people would try to pull her in different directions. Invitations to high-profile speaking engagements and collaborations flooded her inbox. At first, it had been thrilling, but now, it felt suffocating. Amara didn't want to be a commodity. She didn't want her research to become just a headline. So, she made a decision. The next morning, Amara took the first step toward reclaiming control. She called Dr. Harrison. He answered quickly, his tone as enthusiastic as ever. Amara. I just saw your presentation at the symposium. It was phenomenal. The world's eyes are on you, and the project is moving fast. This is your time. Amara took a breath, her heart racing a little. She knew what she needed to say. Dr. Harrison, I've been thinking about the future, and I want to ensure that my work stays true to my values. I need to step back from some of the more public-facing aspects of this project, like the media tours and the interviews. I want to focus on the research itself. I think it's time for me to define what success looks like for me, not based on outside pressure. There was a long pause. For a moment, Amara feared he would resist, but instead, he spoke with surprising understanding. I get it, Amara. You've always been driven by the work, and I respect that. It's easy to get lost in the noise, but if you want to stay grounded, you need to make sure you don't spread yourself too thin. Let's take a step back and reassess how we can move forward. Relief washed over Amara as she realized she had made the right choice. She wasn't backing out of the project, she was simply recalibrating her involvement in a way that allowed her to stay true to her purpose. That afternoon, Amara went to her office, which had started to feel more like a sanctuary than a workspace. She pulled up the research she had been working on, the predictive models, the equations, and felt the familiar thrill of excitement in her chest. This was what had always driven her, the intellectual pursuit, the satisfaction of solving something that seemed impossible. The world of academia, where she could dig deep and truly contribute, was still her passion. But it was also clear now that she needed balance. She had to find a way to integrate her intellectual curiosity with her personal well-being. It wasn't just about the work, it was about how she lived while doing it. Amara called a few of her colleagues, letting them know she would be scaling back on some of the media appearances and talks. Instead, she would be focusing on creating a framework for her model that could be tested in real-world environments, without the distraction of constant publicity. She had learned something important in the past few months: doing meaningful work required periods of solitude, deep thought, and reflection. It wasn't sustainable to chase every opportunity that came her way. As the days passed, Amara felt a new sense of clarity. She continued her work with Dr. Harrison, but her involvement became more focused. They set clear boundaries for the project, and while it remained high-profile, she no longer felt the pressure to attend every press event or be in the public eye. She started to take more time for herself, scheduling breaks throughout the day and learning to say no when the demands of others threatened to overwhelm her. One evening, while walking through the park near her apartment, Amara received a call from Rachel. "Amara, I'm so proud of you," Rachel said, her voice filled with warmth. "You've figured it out. You've made the decision to carve out your own path, to be true to yourself. I can't tell you how much I admire that." Amara smiled softly, the wind tugging at her hair. "I feel like I'm finally on the right track, Rach. It's not just about the accolades anymore. It's about having the freedom to do what I love without losing myself in the process." "You've always had that strength in you," Rachel replied. "Now, you're finally letting yourself embrace it." Weeks turned into months, and Amara continued to work at her own pace, refining her model and sharing it with those who shared her vision. She wasn't chasing headlines anymore. Instead, she was collaborating with colleagues on projects that aligned with her interests and values, with a clear focus on long-term impact rather than immediate recognition. Amara's new path wasn't easy, and the challenges were far from over. But for the first time in a long while, she felt at peace. She wasn't the image others had projected onto her. She was herself, an ambitious, thoughtful, and driven woman, carving out a space where she could make a difference in the world. As she sat back in her office one evening, looking at the equations and models before her, she realized that the journey ahead wasn't just about solving complex problems. It was about staying true to herself while contributing something meaningful. The morning sunlight filtered through the blinds of Amara's apartment, casting a soft, golden glow over the cluttered desk in front of her. It had been several months since she had made the decision to step back from the chaos of media attention and constant demands. She was no longer racing to meet deadlines or fielding requests for interviews. The frantic energy that had once defined her life had dissipated, replaced with a quieter, more focused rhythm. But with that peace came something unexpected, a sense of stillness that allowed her to reflect, to question, to look deeper into the meaning of her work and its potential consequences. Amara leaned back in her chair, staring at the equations on her laptop screen. She had spent countless hours developing her predictive models, tweaking variables, and testing different scenarios. But now, as she gazed at the patterns she had spent so much time perfecting, a thought occurred to her: what was the real purpose of all of this? At first, the answer had been simple: she wanted to make a breakthrough, to solve complex problems that could help people, to be a part of something larger than herself. But now, after months of working at her own pace and reflecting on her journey, Amara realized that there was more at stake than just the equations themselves. There was a world out there that she hadn't fully considered, the people affected by the decisions made based on her work. She thought about the global leaders, economists, and policymakers who might one day rely on her model. She thought about the potential for her work to influence industries, markets, and entire economies. She had always approached her research with the hope of making a positive impact, but now, for the first time, she considered the weight of that responsibility. A few days later, Amara met with Dr. Harrison in his office at the university. The walls were lined with bookshelves filled with texts on economics, mathematics, and complex systems. He looked at her with a mix of curiosity and respect as she sat down across from him. "Amara, you've been quieter than usual these past few weeks," he said, his voice soft but probing. "How are you feeling about the project? You've made incredible progress, but I can tell something's been on your mind." Amara paused, searching for the right words. The weight of her thoughts had been growing, and she wasn't sure how to articulate the complexity of her feelings. Finally, she spoke. "I've been thinking a lot about the bigger picture, Dr. Harrison. The work we're doing is groundbreaking, but what if it has unintended consequences? What if the model we've developed is used to justify decisions that could harm communities or create further inequality?" Dr. Harrison leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "That's an important question, Amara. The impact of any scientific discovery or innovation can be far-reaching, and sometimes, those impacts aren't immediately clear. But it's part of our responsibility as researchers to consider the consequences of our work. The question is, how do we ensure that our models are used ethically?" Amara nodded slowly. "I don't have all the answers, but I think I need to start thinking more critically about how our work can be applied. It's not enough to just be right, we have to be mindful of the potential harm we could cause." Dr. Harrison regarded her with a mixture of admiration and concern. "You're maturing into the kind of scientist who thinks beyond the equations, Amara. That's rare, and it's necessary. But remember, you can't control how others use your work. What you can do is make sure it's as responsible as possible, and guide others in its application." Amara sat in silence, contemplating his words. It wasn't just about the data, it was about the lives impacted by those numbers. She had always been driven by the desire to solve problems, but now, she realized that solving problems also meant taking responsibility for the potential consequences of those solutions. That evening, as Amara walked home from the university, the weight of her thoughts lingered. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was standing at a crossroads. Her research was gaining recognition, and the world was beginning to take notice, but what good was all of it if she wasn't using her position to guide the future in a way that aligned with her values? She stopped at a local bookstore on her way home, seeking some comfort in the familiar act of browsing through the pages of books that had once inspired her. She ran her fingers across the spines of old favorites, books on philosophy, ethics, and the history of science. There, in the corner, she spotted a book by one of her intellectual heroes, a famous economist known for his work on the ethical implications of technological advancements. The book was titled Ethics in Economics: The Human Side of Innovation. Amara pulled it from the shelf and settled into a cozy armchair in the store's reading nook. As she flipped through the pages, she found herself drawn to a passage that spoke directly to her current dilemma. We, as creators of new systems and technologies, have a duty to not only be mindful of how our work shapes the world but to actively engage with the broader implications of that work. Innovation should not exist in a vacuum. It must always be tethered to a commitment to human well-being and social justice. The word struck her deeply. It was exactly what she had been grappling with, the realization that innovation, no matter how brilliant, had to be guided by a sense of responsibility toward the people it would affect. Amara closed the book and sat in the quiet for a moment, letting the gravity of her thoughts sink in. She understood now, her work wasn't just a tool for prediction, it was a part of something much larger, a global conversation about how society could use knowledge to build a better, more equitable future. And it was up to her, as the creator of that knowledge, to ensure it was used wisely. In the weeks that followed, Amara made some bold decisions. She reached out to colleagues from diverse fields, sociologists, ethicists, and policymakers, inviting them to collaborate on a new project that would focus on the ethical dimensions of economic forecasting. She began to integrate ethical considerations into her research, developing new frameworks to ensure that her work could not only predict economic trends but also account for the social impact those trends might have. Her new approach wasn't without challenges. There were those who questioned her decision to shift her focus, arguing that it would slow down the progress of the project. But Amara knew that this was the right path. She wasn't just solving equations anymore, she was helping to shape the future, and that meant thinking carefully about the consequences of every decision. One evening, as Amara sat in her office, reviewing a new draft of the ethical framework, she received a call from Rachel. "You've been busy," Rachel said, her voice teasing. "I can tell by the way you're always working on something new. What's going on with you?" Amara smiled, feeling a sense of calm she hadn't felt in a long time. "I've been reflecting a lot, Rach. I think I'm finally understanding the true impact of my work, and it's not just about making predictions. It's about making sure those predictions are used for good, for the betterment of everyone. I'm learning that the work is only meaningful if it's done with care and responsibility." Rachel's voice softened. "You're growing, Amara. It's inspiring to watch." Amara sat back in her chair, looking out the window at the city lights. For the first time in a long while, she felt at peace. She had found a way to move forward, one that not only honored her intellect but also her heart. The following months brought a sense of quiet satisfaction for Amara. She had crafted a new ethical framework for her research, one that balanced the pursuit of knowledge with a deep respect for the consequences her work might have on society. It wasn't just a model, it was a blueprint for a new way of thinking about innovation, one that integrated the human side of progress. But as she looked around her office, filled with papers, equations, and notes, Amara realized there was more to be done. The work was never truly finished. With her position growing stronger in the academic and research communities, she felt a pull to use her experience and insight to help others. She was no longer just a researcher working alone in her office, she was becoming a leader, someone whose actions could shape the future of her field. The first step towards solidifying her legacy came in the form of a mentorship program she decided to establish. She had always been the kind of person who believed that knowledge should be shared, not hoarded. Her own journey had been shaped by mentors and colleagues who had guided her, so now, she wanted to pay it forward. Amara reached out to a few of her colleagues at the university, asking them to nominate promising young researchers for the program. Her goal was to mentor a small group of students and early career professionals, guiding them not only through the intricacies of economic modeling and data analysis but also teaching them the importance of ethical decision-making in their research. She wanted to give them the tools to succeed in a world where the consequences of their work could ripple out in ways they might never expect. One of the first students to join the program was a young woman named Jasmine, a rising star in the field of data science. She was brilliant but raw, her enthusiasm for the work occasionally overshadowed by her lack of experience in thinking critically about the broader impact of her analyses. When Amara first met her, Jasmine reminded her of herself in many ways, a driven, intelligent person with a burning desire to make a difference. But Amara also saw the potential for Jasmine to become consumed by the pressure to succeed, just as she had been. She knew the importance of guiding her with care, showing her how to balance ambition with responsibility. Weeks passed, and Amara's mentorship program began to take shape. She held weekly sessions with her students, diving deep into the ethical considerations of economic forecasting. They discussed case studies where economic models had been used to justify policies that had harmed vulnerable populations. Amara encouraged them to think critically about the implications of their work, pushing them to ask hard questions and challenge assumptions. One afternoon, as the group gathered around a large table in the university's seminar room, Jasmine spoke up. "Professor, I'm still struggling with something," she said. "We've talked a lot about the importance of ethical frameworks, but sometimes it feels like we're paralyzed by uncertainty. If we always wait for the perfect answer, we'll never get anything done. How do we balance the need for action with the need for caution?" Amara smiled at Jasmine's question. It was a good one she had asked herself many times during her own journey. She took a moment before responding. "It's a tough balance, Jasmine. But here's the truth, we can't always know the future, and there will always be uncertainty in our work. What we can do, though, is make sure we're asking the right questions, weighing the consequences, and being transparent about our assumptions. Sometimes, the best we can do is make the most informed decision we can, while acknowledging that we might not have all the answers. The key is to stay committed to learning, to reflection, and to responsibility." Jasmine nodded thoughtfully, clearly processing the answer. Amara could see the shift in her mindset, the beginnings of a deeper understanding of what it meant to be a responsible researcher. As the months went by, the students in Amara's mentorship program began to flourish. They were taking the ethical framework she had developed and adapting it to their own research projects. Amara was proud of the work they were doing, but she also knew that her influence wasn't just about teaching them how to navigate the complexities of their fields, it was about shaping the way they thought about their roles as creators of knowledge. One evening, after a long day of meetings and research, Amara sat in her office reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. She thought about her early days as a graduate student, driven by the desire to make a breakthrough, consumed by the need to prove herself. She thought about the times when the pressure to succeed had almost broken her, when she had been on the brink of giving up. And then, she thought about the moment when everything had changed, the moment when she had realized that true success wasn't about accolades or recognition, but about using her work to make a meaningful difference in the world. It was about balance, reflection, and responsibility. Amara stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the city below. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm, golden light across the skyline. She felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that she was not only contributing to her field but also helping to shape the next generation of thinkers and innovators. The work wasn't easy, and there were still challenges ahead, but for the first time in a long time, Amara felt like she was on the right path, one that not only reflected her values but also created a ripple effect that would impact others long after she was gone. The next morning, Amara received an email that made her pause. It was from a prominent journal in the field of economics, asking her to contribute to a special issue on the ethical implications of predictive modeling. They had heard about her work and were interested in her perspective on the subject. She smiled as she read through the email. It was a sign that the world was starting to take notice of the shift she had been advocating for, a shift toward more responsible, human-centered innovation. Amara thought about how far she had come, from the quiet student at Harvard, to the woman leading the charge for ethical change in her field. She had built something meaningful, something that would last. And now, as her influence spread, she could see the ripple effect beginning to take shape. Later that day, as she sat down at her desk to begin drafting her contribution to the journal, Amara couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude. She was no longer just a researcher chasing after breakthroughs. She was a leader, a mentor, and a change-maker. And in that moment, she knew that her legacy wasn't just about the work she had done, it was about the work she had inspired others to do. The sky outside Amara's office window had deepened into twilight, the last hues of orange and pink fading into the coming night. Her desk was a mess of papers, equations, drafts, notes from recent meetings with colleagues and students, each page a piece of the complex puzzle that she had spent years working on. Yet, tonight, for the first time in a while, she didn't feel the usual pressure to solve everything. She didn't feel the gnawing urgency that had once driven her from one project to the next. Tonight, she felt a quiet calm. Her journey had been far from easy. The young woman who had once sat in the back of lecture halls, unsure if she even belonged at Harvard, had transformed into someone who now shaped the conversation in her field. Yet, as much as she had accomplished, Amara knew her work was far from finished. The equations she had helped solve, the ethical frameworks she had built, they were all just the beginning. It had been a year since she had taken the bold step of stepping back from the whirlwind of media attention. The world had moved on, but Amara had not. She had dug deeper into her work, strengthened her research, and built a platform for the future of ethical innovation in economics. And now, she had come to realize that her role had expanded beyond that of a mere scholar. She was shaping the future, not just through her equations but through the minds she was mentoring and the ethical foundation she had laid for future research. The university had called her in for a meeting that morning. The board had been following her progress, watching as her mentorship program flourished, as her research reached new heights, and as her influence grew not just as an academic but as a thought leader in the conversation surrounding responsible innovation. They wanted her to take a position as the head of a new interdisciplinary center at the university, one dedicated to studying the ethics of data science, economics, and technology. It was an opportunity she had never expected, but it was one that, in hindsight, felt like the natural next step in her journey. Amara had spent the entire day pondering the offer. On one hand, it was a dream come true, a chance to build something truly transformative, to leave a lasting imprint on the field. On the other hand, it was an enormous responsibility. This new center would not just focus on research, it would influence policy, shape the ethical guidelines that govern the use of technology and data, and, ultimately, have a global impact. As she sat in her office that evening, Amara thought about the weight of the decision. Her mind drifted back to the early days of her career, to the moments when she had been unsure of her own worth, when she had felt like an outsider among the elite scholars of Harvard. She thought about the sleepless nights spent poring over equations, the doubts that had crept in when she had failed, the endless cycle of striving for more. But now, all of that seemed to have led to this moment. She had the knowledge, the experience, and, perhaps most importantly, the clarity to approach this responsibility with wisdom. She had learned the hard way that it wasn't enough to just have the right answers, it was about understanding the questions that needed to be asked. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Rachel, just as Amara was lost in thought. Rachel. So, any updates? You've been quiet all day. I know that look, what's going on? Amara smiled as she typed back, trying to put into words the weight of her thoughts. Amara. They offered me the job to lead the new ethics center at the university. I'm not sure what to think. It's a huge responsibility, but I feel like it's the right step. I've been thinking a lot about the future, about what kind of legacy I want to leave. A few minutes later, Rachel's response came. Rachel. Amara, this is amazing. You've been working toward this for years. I know it's scary, but you've already made such a huge impact. The world needs you in this role, and you'll make it exactly what it needs to be. Plus, you'll be able to guide so many people. Trust yourself. This is your time. Amara leaned back in her chair, feeling a sense of peace wash over her as she read Rachel's words. Rachel was right. This wasn't just about Amara anymore, it was about the world that needed her leadership, her guidance, and her vision for a more ethical future. The next morning, Amara walked into the meeting room with the university board, her mind made up. She was ready for the next chapter. As the board members discussed the logistics of her new role and the challenges ahead, Amara felt a deep sense of alignment with her purpose. She wasn't just accepting a position, she was taking the reins of something bigger than herself. It wasn't just about the accolades anymore, it was about the people who would benefit from her work, the communities whose lives would be touched by her ethical innovations. As the meeting came to a close, one of the board members, Dr. Evelyn Carter, a seasoned economist who had been a mentor to Amara during her early years, leaned in and smiled. "I think you're going to do great things here, Amara. You've already proven that you can lead with integrity, and now you have the chance to shape the future of an entire generation of thinkers and innovators. This is your moment." Amara nodded, feeling the weight of her words and her actions. This was the moment when everything she had worked for, the breakthroughs, the ethical considerations, the mentorship, would come together to create a lasting legacy. She was no longer just a student or a researcher, she was a leader in every sense of the word. That evening, Amara stood in front of her apartment window once more, watching the city lights blink against the backdrop of the darkening sky. The future, she realized, was unwritten. It had always been that way. Every decision she made, every path she chose, was a part of shaping what would come next. The road ahead would be filled with challenges. There would be moments of doubt, moments where the weight of responsibility seemed too great to bear. But Amara knew now that she had everything she needed to navigate those challenges: the knowledge, the experience, the ethical foundation, and the unwavering commitment to making a positive difference in the world. She had chosen this path not because it was easy, but because it was right. And as she looked toward the horizon, she felt a sense of excitement and peace. The future was hers to shape, and she was ready for whatever came next. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?